Look at this horrible traffic jam. In this video I'm going to show you how to make a rooftop birdie for your car, which is great fun, and also how to turn your pillar drill or bench drill into a lathe and a sanding machine. In this movie we're going to build both a hummingbird and a robin rooftop birdie. We're going to concentrate on all the difficult bits like the blades, the hubs and the aerodynamics. We're going to sort out all the structural points where they've got to be strong, and we're going to do all the manufacturing tips we can give you, but we're not going to concentrate on the finishing and the colouring and stuff like that. That's a personal preference that you can do at a later date. But by the end of this video you should have a good idea about how to make your own rooftop birdie. Using a tree as a stand-in cameraman, it seems the hummingbird can't get away from all this wood. To make the individual blades, you first start with a big chunk of wood like this. Mark your profile on the end of the wood. You probably actually want it only about half that deep. You want it so that you can cut about 5 or 6 blades from the one piece. Once you've marked that profile out, you then shape the whole block into the shape of your profile before you slice it into individual blades using your bandsaw or your table saw, sledge, whatever you're going to use to slice it. But then you slice them and then you shape them on your sanding machine, giving them a leading edge and a trailing edge. Here we have a quick few tips on how to make the hub for the centre of your propeller for your birdie. Now you start with a 25mm thick piece of wood, and using a 50mm hole saw you cut out your hub, and then whilst it's like that you put a bolt through it, put it in your pillar drill, and then sand the edges nice and smooth before you then use the 22mm hole saw for the exact size of your bearings, and you put a little recess in both sides so that a bearing sits nicely in there. Now probably the easiest way to mark out the 5 points on your hub where you're going to drill it to insert the blades is to use Microsoft Word and print out a 5-pointed star, and then draw some extra lines on that 5-pointed star using the tools in Word, and then you get your hub, place it exactly in the middle of your 5-pointed star, and then using a square you can accurately mark out perfect 5 points at the right degrees all around your hub, ready for drilling. As you can see, a piece of wood with a nut and bolt through it with some sandpaper stuck on it. Now what you do is basically find yourself a small bit of copper pipe. This bit's 12mm, and then you put that in your bench drill and you use it to drill over the ends of your blades. And then once you've done that to all your blades, you find a drill bit that matches the exact size of the end of your blades, and then you use that to drill into your hub so that your blades are a nice perfect fit in there, so they'll sit in there lovely before you've even glued them up. Next thing you have to do is find the appropriate drill bit that slots perfectly inside your piece of copper pipe. Thread it onto your bench drill. And then just drill away. Once you've done that, just check to see if they fit okay. That one seems a little bit loose actually. Let's try a different one. That's okay. We've got to cut that a little bit shorter. And once you've drilled all the holes in the side of your hub, then you've got to drill the centre hole out so that it's bigger than the bar that's going to go through the centre of your bearings. Now what I'm going to show you here is how to make these perfect rounds on the end of the blade so they fit perfectly into your hub. Now we fitted the 12mm piece of copper pipe into the bench drill, and now because the blade's a little bit too short, we've got to raise the centre of the bench drill. Now using this piece of wood and a pin and an accurate mark on the centre of the bench drill base, we can now line up this block so we know where that centre is. We then clamp it to the bench so it's in the right place. Then using the other table, we're going to use this table to lean against so that we can drill. And once you've drilled down just about a centimetre or so, you can cut off the little burrs. And then you have a perfect blade to slot into your hub. Absolutely perfect. Now in here, what we have is a load of wheel bearings, because they're useful for a lot of projects. They come off of skateboards, roller skates, scooters, you name it. You see one at the dump, you pick it up and you strip the bearings out and stick them in your oil when you get home. They're useful for loads of things. Rooftop Birdy hub assembly take 5. Right, starting with the hub, first thing to do is squeeze the press fit bearings into each side of the hub. Should be a perfect fit if you've made it correctly. And then fit the hub onto the bar that you clamped onto the bed of the bandsaw or whichever bed you're using. And then we're going to mix some Poundland epoxy resin to glue the blades in. Easy mix, 2-part epoxy resin, nice and strong for this import. There's a lot of load goes on these blades at speed, so you want to make these nice and strong. Then just go around and put a blob in each hole. Probably best to do 3 of them on one side first and then put the blades in, so it stops it all running back out. Remember, you put a little bit around the tip of the blade as well, round where the blade squeezes into the hub. It's too much of that one. I'll take some of that off of there. And a bit of glue in the back too. again, you just brush some around the end of the blade where it's going to mate into the hole. Now when you've got it, first thing to do is check that they're all pointing the same way, because there's a different profile on each side of them. So you want them all lined up in the same way. Then you get your mitre, which is set at 33 degrees to the forward direction of your car. If your car's going that way, it's 33 degrees off of the forward direction. Use your mitre set to set up the angle of each blade. Let's see what I'm doing here. So we go that way on this one. You just go around, adjust each one of them so they're exactly on 33 degrees. That one's a little bit the other way. Go around and check again. And push them all the way home. And then go around and check one more time. They should be starting to get dry by now, because it takes about 30 seconds, about 3 minutes I think, that epoxy resin. Once you've got them all at 33mm, you can get a rag and rag it off in there a little bit if you like. Rag. Important thing is get strength in the joint, because 70 mile an hour, 80 mile an hour, there's a lot of load on these blades. They've got to be strong. Once you wipe the glue off, give it another check. When you're happy they're all at the right angle, just leave it to dry. Put your lid back on your epoxy resin. The best thing about the rooftop birdie is it can help you find your car in a car park. Here we have a lovely wood pigeon, or what was formerly known as a ring dove, feeding at the palm tree garden. Up the back there we have a mega 10 room nest box with 10 different size holes in it all the way around for a variety of different types of bird. Now here is exactly what you need if you want to turn your bench drill into a functioning lathe. You can just make your own makeshift drive pin from a bit of stud bar sharpened with a nut locking a wing nut, which you then drive into one end of your work as your drive pin. Then you just want a nice 22mm bearing, again with a nut and bolt through it, a little wooden bracket that you make up yourself that you clamp onto the bottom of your bench drill with a 22mm hole in it and a little shelf in there. And this is effectively your tailstock, as we've said. And your work just sits on there and spins nicely with a nice hole drilled in the other end of there. And then finally you just got to make this bar that bolts onto to the base of your bench drill, and I bolt it onto where you sometimes store a chuck key, and I've put a chrome pipe over the top of the stud bar, so when you're running your hand up and down it's a little bit more comfortable after a long time. And that's basically it. With that you can turn loads of stuff. It's an easy way to make a functioning lathe for peanuts. Absolutely costs next to nothing. The first thing you've got to do, you've got to get your blank. You've got to slice a line in one end of it, a couple of mil deep, to sit your drive pin in, and then you've just got to drill a centre hole in the bottom so it sits on that stud on the bottom bearing. So that's the first thing to do. So we'll start up here on the bandsaw. And then we drill a little centre hole in the other end of the workpiece. Just hold it with my feet. There we go. Perfect. So you put a little spike on the end of a stud, put a wing nut on it, another bolt to lock it in place. Bob's your uncle, Millie's your aunt. Put your mask on. Your glasses or safety glasses. Look at all this sawdust from just turning 4 bodies, 4 bases and 4 heads. The makeshift wood lathe is doing a good job, eh? You have to be double careful when you're sanding, when you've got this bar on there, that you don't get your hand trapped in there. So if you're sanding, sand on this side, or better still, take the bar off and do all your sanding at the end. But all the time it's on there, be double careful, you don't want to be trapped in there. This drill's quite an easy one, you can actually stop it. You can stop it with your hand, so it's not going to be too much of a problem. But especially if you've got a powerful drill, you don't want your hand stuck behind that bar. That lathe has been used today to turn all of these lovely their bodies and bases for rooftop birdies. Actually, there's also some heads in there as well, which are the double ones. See the double one there? That will cut into 2 heads for 2 birdies. If you want to, I'm not going to go through everything you need to know about every little intricate part on how to make all the things you make, like beaks and tails and all the little distinguishing marks of your birdie. They're up to you how you make them. For instance, if you want to make an extravagant looking bird, you might want to put a massive beak on it. But there again, if you want to make a bird that looks like something for real, you want to keep all the parts to scale. So this, for instance, will be the beak of a robin. And once there's a hole drilled in there and that's sunk in, that beak's going to be about 1/4 the size of the entire length of the head. And what you do is you go online, have a look at some pictures from all different angles, and get someone in basic measurements. So you want to keep the main parts of the bird to scale, so it looks something like the real bird. When you're making tails, for instance, again, you might want to just put a nice big long plain tail on there, which is going to be nice and strong. if you're making a racket tailed hummingbird, you might want to make a bit more of an intricate tail, like this one for instance. There's only one side of it there, the other side's got to go in yet. It's still in the drill piece there. Also, you might just want to pick up a scrap piece of wood, mark out some sort of tail on there, and just chop it into shape. See what comes up. You know, you don't know. Sometimes the best bits you make come from just a piece of scrap of wood you picked up. The main thing is you've got to remember, at 70 miles an hour on your car, there's a lot of loads on these things, so you need to make it strong. And for instance, if you're going over the flyover, you could be travelling at 70 miles an hour. You come out of the embankments at each end, and there might be a 40 mile an hour crosswind over the top of the bridge. So you're doing 70 mile an hour into a 40 mile an hour crosswind. This stuff's got to be strong. That's the main thing. Here we have a couple of life-size racket tail hummingbirds. The one on the left is the female. The one on the right with the white boots is the male. White booted racket tail hummingbirds to scale. And so you can get an idea of the scale. There's my hand. They're tiny little things in the real world. Really are small. We're nearly there now. We've got the tail parts, 4 different types of tail, 4 different types of beaks on the heads, all the body parts. We got these parts which are going to be the bases. I'll explain about them later. And we've got 4 propellers. So we've now got 4 birdies in the making. As things are progressing, it's getting a little bit more complicated now, so I'm going to reduce working on 4 birds at once to 2 birds. So I've put 2 birds aside for the moment, all the components for 2, and I'm just going to complete these two to finish off this video. There's going to be the racket-tailed hummingbird and the robin. Now, as well as doing the decoration, I've cut a simple groove in the end of the body, and the robin's tail should fit perfectly in there. So when that's epoxy resined up, that'll be a nice strong fit. Now the important thing here is to get this profile down so that there's no ridge there, because any time you leave a ridge, it's going to cause turbulence, which is going to cause eddies, which is going to cause drag on your car. So you want all these joins as smooth as possible. As with the hummingbird's tail, the first section is going to slot in and glue in tight there, and then I'm going to smooth down this edge so that you can't feel the join. And it's important to have a completely smooth join. Again, otherwise you'll get turbulence, which causes pressure drag, which causes drag on your car. It's actually quite a lot. There's a lot of drag created from roof bars and from any sharp profiles on the outside of your car will cause eddies, which causes a low pressure to build behind your car, which sucks the car back. It's called pressure drag, as opposed to skin friction drag. If, for instance, you leave a rough surface on here, that will also cause eddies, but skin friction drag is a small part of the drag. It's the eddies created by bad profiles that cause pressure drag, which suck the car back. You notice on the tail of the hummingbird, where I've connected the blades into the midsection, I've profiled out a groove in the centre so that the circles really do closely match the last part of the blades, and this bit has now been perfectly smoothed, and this bit will be again once it's glued up. But first I'm going to glue these 2 up and the tail of the robin, and then I'm going to put 3 little pins in there, little wooden pins, and 2 in each side of those, just to lock them in place so that, you know, as time goes by and they get a bit older, they don't work themselves loose. Unbelievably, I've actually ran a dustpan and brush around the workshop. Anyway, so now I've marked out the 3 points on the robin's tail and the 4 points on the tail of the racket tail hummingbird, where I'm going to drill with a 3mm drill and then pin it with this fine pine skewer. Okay, now I've just drilled the tail of the hummingbird and I've marked out the tail of the robin ready to be drilled. Both tails are glued before drilling. Now we're going to mix up some epoxy resin, and using these pine skewers we're going to just glue them into the hole and then just snip them off with a pair of pincers. So first we've got to mix up some glue. It might be preferable just to use some PVA wood glue for this sort of thing, but at least with this stuff it's dry in 3 minutes and it's strong as well, so that's generally why I use it. So just make sure plenty gets in the hole. And make sure there's some all the way around the end of the skewer. Push it down into the hole till you can feel it with your finger at the back. Snip it off. Do the same for the next one along. Crush the end of that one a bit. So do a little bit of squeeze, a little bit of persuasion. Okay, make sure they're all the way through because you can sand them off in seconds. And we're going to do the same for the robin. Mix up some lovely 1 pound a tube Poundland epoxy resin. Best value buying all woodworking products in the world, I reckon. I don't think you get a better buy than that. Anyway. So again, squeeze a bit in each hole. Push it down, give it some encouragement. Could actually then spin it over, do the same on the back actually. And again, push it through till you feel it come out the other side. Snip it off. Okay, that's all you got to do. Just let it go off for 10 minutes and then, or 3 minutes if you like, but 10 minutes just to make sure. Then you've got to sand them up. If you're using a pair of these lovely little pliers that I bought for £1 in a little Hampton bargains galore shop, excellent for £1, you want to wipe off all the epoxy resin before you put them away after you've snipped off the tips. And with this head here, there's a crack in there. Like most birdies, or like most birds, there's a crack in the head. So I'm going to mix up some epoxy resin and just put a little bit in there just to give it a bit, make sure it stays strong. During this woodworking project, I've been using 3 different types of sanding disc in my multi-functioning pillar drill. First is this one, which I made with just a bit of scrap wood and a bolt through it, which is one I use most. It's used all the time, this one. This one you can use, is more for metal, cleaning metal and stuff, but it's useful for profiling as well. And this is a third type of one, another cheap one you make yourself. Sometimes I epoxy resin these onto the back to make it last a bit longer, but this one's just wash it on there at the moment. And I'm going to use this one now to clean up these pins, these skewer pins. gives that a good clean up. You can't even hardly see the pins now, but it's also almost totally flush on the tail. I'll sand that completely flush and then repair the shadowing work to the tail. And there you go. After a nice bit of sanding up, you can see the nice neat pins and the smooth transitions on the tails of both birdies, and the smooth transition at the other end of the tail on the Racket tail Hummingbird. As you probably noticed during all this filming, this drill, you have to bump it with your hand, like you have to bump start most of the cars I've had in my life. Reason being, the solenoid or whatever it is that kick starts the motor is not working. On top of that, inside there, the spring is busted, so we're using snakies, as they don't actually return the drill, but they stop the drill from falling, so they're good enough. And on top of that, if you look at the switch, there's a little screw in the middle of it because the internal of the switch actually broke off, and there's a third repair there. So this lovely old drill, although it's got loads of repairs all over it, is being used for multitasking purposes in this film, like probably no other woodworking person uses one. Now, after struggling everywhere to find some 8mm steel bar to run between the heads and the body of the birds to mount the propellers on, I managed to find this 8mm aluminium tube, 1 metre length, for £4 in one of the builder centres. I'd have preferred steel, just in case the bearing starts to spin on its centre diameter on the aluminium. The aluminium will wear quite quickly, but I shouldn't think that'll be a problem. I'm sure this will suffice for this job. As well as that, I've cut the heads off a couple of tent pegs, and these steel bars have cleaned up in the pillar drill, and they're now going to be used to bridge the gap between the bodies and these aerofoil shaped pieces, which are going to bolt onto the roof bars, and using those metal plates that we saw we've already prepared. And these tent pegs, one in the front, one in the back, will support the birdies. Now, looking at the grain pattern on the aerofoil shapes, these are going to be quite load bearing, and when the bracket's bolted around the bottom of the roof bar, it's got to be strong, and there's going to be 4 holes going up through here. So I was looking at which way the grain goes, so we can sort of try and make sure it's not going to split. And you'd think that as the grain's running around this way, it would be best to bolt through that way, but the split's actually on that side. It's actually the sign of any splitting is actually across the grain, so it looks like it would actually split that way if anything. So it would be best to bolt through that way, having these parts on the side rather than on the top. So we've cut a nice flat shelf in one side of the aerofoil shape, and then we're going to fit that on. Pretend this is the roof bar. We're going to sit that on the roof bar. Then we're going to use these metal brackets that we've made to bolt up from underneath and to clamp that down on the roof bar. And then we're going to have the steel bars going into the top of this, with the birdie sitting on top of the steel bars. And hopefully that should work. That's the first time I've made this type of a bracket. Now, using this wonderful clamping arrangement, I'm going to try and drill 4 holes through the aerofoil base, using the plate holes as a guideline for where the drilling holes need to go. Okay, so now I've drilled the 4 holes through the aerofoil shaped base that line up perfectly with the specific plate that's marked on the bottom, and I've now counterbored the top end so that when we put 10mm nuts on the bolts, 10mm nylock nuts on the bolts, they sit below the profile of the aerofoil shape so they don't cause any drag themselves. I've made up another quick jig for the aerofoil bases, and this is just a little jig that's going to mimic the roof bars. So when we're drilling the holes for the vertical bars to hold the main birdie, this jig's going to hold it nice and flat on the drill bed. Now when you're drilling these holes, it's probably best not to put them right in the middle of the other two bolt holes, because that area will then become weak because there's too many holes in the same place. So go about 1 centimetre behind them, centimetre out of line with these two original bolt holes, and then should make it a bit stronger. Now as you can see, I've drilled the holes in the bottom airfoil base and fitted the two bars so that they're at the same height. Again, due to the strength requirement of the working conditions of these birdies, you need to make sure these bars are set as deep in the airfoil bases as possible, because you want as much of a purchase on those bases so that they don't split and snap out the top in amongst the high winds. As well as painting the outer profiles of these bases, you may also want to, once you've bolted them up onto your roof bars, you might want to fill the holes around the nuts with some sort of filler, probably P38 car filler. Sand them smooth and bury them in filler and before you paint them, and that way it makes it more difficult for people to steal them as well. Now we set up this clamping arrangement to try and keep the body of the Hummingbird flat, so we can then drill the hole for the support bars into the airfoil base, but we're going to drill through and try and find the aluminium, because we want this hole to be as deep right down to the aluminium, but obviously no deeper, so we should be able to detect the change in drilling pressure. I'm not sure if I found the aluminium or the end of the drilling depth. Have a quick look. Oh no, we found the aluminium, so that's perfect. As we drill the back hole, there'll be no aluminium to find in there, so we just got to drill till we think we're about halfway through at least, and then we can glue it in there strong later. Now, as you can see, there's the initial assembly on the bars of the airfoil base. And what you have to check here is that the propeller's not going to hit the airfoil base, and this is like luckily correct to about the perfect place. It comes within about 1 centimetre of it. There's a bit of deflection on them at speed, so you don't want that hitting there at any time. I think it will just destroy it. But that's looking pretty good. Just got to add the eyes and the beaks, and then really the construction's done. It's a bit of gluing up, and now making use of the tailstock bearing again with the bench drill lathe, using a 10mm blade drill hammered into a piece of wood. I can now insert this into the chuck of the drill, push the tip of the beak. This is going to be a beak for for the racket-tailed hummingbird. Push it into the bottom bearing, lock up the chuck, and this will now turn lovely and be useful for sanding. And as you can see, the tailstock bearing is coming useful again. Looking at this head, this end is a little bit steep there, so we'll probably make this the front end of the bird where we're going to attach the beak. So we need to sand this end smooth drill a hole and insert the beak. This end is where the propeller is going to sit, and then we just need to drill 2 recess holes to fit the eyes. So we'll start by just sanding that end on the makeshift sander. Once you have the shape quite close, you can finish it by hand, and the beak's going to go in there. Because there's 2 circular grain patterns on both sides, I'll probably put the eyes in those grain patterns. Then we're going to do a final bit of shaping to the robin's beak. Finally, you get the perfect little robin's beak, which once it's fitted into the head will look absolutely perfect. I'm now going to try and turn some eyes for the hummingbirds, and I need a little bit of dowel, bit small, bit narrower than that. So I'm going to mount this up on the lathe and turn it and see how we get on. Pushing right down on the bearing stud at the bottom, or the tail stock. Hold the dry pin down. Lock it up there. And it's good to go. You see this gouge is sharpened that way, away from the inner groove, whereas this one sharpened back to the inner groove. I'm actually thinking this new gauge that I've bought is wrong, but I'm not sure because I'm not an expert. Still think that's a little bit too fat. Looks about the right size for what I need. Now we've turned these 2 eyes on the lathe here. We're going to sand them before we cut them off, and then they should be perfect. Sanded it into a perfect half sphere, and now we're going to slice that off on the bandsaw and move on to the next one. That'll make, once gloss painted and lacquered, that'll make a beautiful shiny eye that's going to drill a hole in the side of the head and sit it actually right inside the hole, so it gives the bird a real bit of character, that does. Then we have two wonderful pairs of eyes ready to drill and seat in the side of the heads of the birds. Now we're going to continue to spray the Racket tail hummingbird and the robin beaks black. We're also going to spray four eyes black, four eyes green, and we're going to spray the four brackets that I've made up there for attaching the bases to the roof bars. We're going to spray those green as well, so later on with a permanent marker we can put some alignment arrows on them, so because the bolt holes are not exactly right, so they'll be designated to each individual drilled base at some point. So we're going to spray those green. We'll start by doing that. Then we're going to spray the robin and racket tail bird beaks and the other four eyes. Careful not to get the black paint over there on the green stuff. And all the parts are mounted on drawing pins, so you can get right round to the bottom of them. I've just rotated the boards that they're sitting on so that I can give them another coat from a completely different angle. Careful not to blow the eyes away, they move about a bit on the drawing pin. I just want to show you before I lacquer them up that the beaks are drawing pinned on through a piece of cardboard, so they stand up nicely. And secondly, I've repainted these with a second coat of a better green, a British Racing green, more metallic-y green. So now, just to finish them off, we're going to give them a quick coat of lacquer. And I'm going to spin the boards 180 degrees and do it again from the other side. There'll be lovely character building components of the head, the bird's head, the eyes, the beaks and the brackets for the bases. Now I'll just set up a nice 7.7mm diameter drill so I can drill the hole in the heads to mount the axle for the propeller blades. That's a perfect fit in there. Now we're just going to drill another recess hole in the side of the robin's head, and I'm using the grain patterns on the side to work out where to put these eyes. And we're using an 18mm blade drill, which is pretty blunt, so you're going to see me do a lot of stabbing motions to get it working. There we can put the beak back in, and we should get an eye that fits perfectly into the recess. Then you've got absolutely wonderful robin's head. Perfect. Now, as you can see, we've got a complete hummingbird and a complete robin. As you can see, all four of these rooftop birdies are running perfectly. We've got the two racket tail hummingbirds on the top there, the little ones, which to scale, they're actually pretty much to scale how big they are in the wild, and they're almost the right colours as well, with a blue tail and a green body and a white underbody for the female and white boots on the male. Here we have the latest hummingbird we just built in the workshop, and there's the robin over there as well. Over here we have the original hummingbird, and you can see this one's actually mounted on a purpose-built roof bar, again that's aerofoil shaped, so that should reduce drag right across the top of the car as well. So if you get to making your own roof bar, you've got to make that aerofoil shaped as well, ideally. And this hummingbird, it's been on this roof now for about 4 months. 4 or 5 months it must be approaching, and still going good. I've had to change the bearings once, and other than that it's perfect. This new racket-tailed hummingbird spinning beautifully, and the robin ain't doing so bad either, by the looks of things. They're excellent. I've got a new aerofoil shaped mounting base on them, which should improve the aerodynamics, and they're actually a little bit more streamlined throughout as well than the original one, so they're improving. As well as these two we just made, I've also got these two bigger ones, massive ones, and these ones are part of a project to power electricity. They've actually got stators and rotors in them, and they generate about 12 volts with a couple of amps. I spent years trying to get people to get these fitted on the top of lampposts so that aesthetically pleasing wind turbines could be used in and around cities more, because they're always rejected because people don't like the look of them. So that was my angle, but it never worked. I tried for years to get people to do it, but nobody did it. That's about it for me and the hummingbird today. Thanks again for joining us on this journey. And the hummingbirds told me if I make a couple of quid out of this video, I could buy myself a new pillar drill. Which is a result. We hope you make a lovely rooftop birdie for the top of your own motor. Thank you. Bye bye.